Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Hey, sorry it's been a while since I've done a video, but March, April, May is my really busy season for tours. Such things as roseate spoonbills, ospreys, snail kites. So I've been busy, but things are winding down a bit. Getting ready for my trip to Alaska, which I'm really looking forward to. Hoping to do at least a couple videos on that, but that's obviously later. In this video, what I want to do is I want to go over some stuff about the Canon R5 and the Canon R3. I have both, and how I have them set up for birds in flight, and how I'm using those setups now in the field, now that I've had both cameras for quite a while and I've shot a lot of images with both cameras. I've kind of got a really good feel now for how to use my setup when it comes to IBIS settings and autofocus settings, and then how I react to different scenarios in the field. And I'm going to use snail kites as an example because they fly low, lots of different backgrounds, including sticks and things like that. So if you're having trouble still with the autofocus staying on your bird, when there's backgrounds, when the bird passes in behind sticks, trees, things like that, different shooting scenarios, I'm going to use my snail kite experience from this past season. Still going on, but it's almost done now, to demonstrate how I'm now using the 3 back button autofocus setup that I have, changing IBIS, stuff like that, how I'm using those setups to maximize the number of keepers as far as tack sharp images I'm getting. So if you're interested in knowing what I'm doing in the field to maximize my keeper rate, stay tuned. Okay, so let's talk about my setup first for my cameras. IBIS IS for shooting birds in flight mainly. And we're talking about snail kites here because they tend to fly low, so there's almost always a background of some sort. So we're talking about flight shots. We're going to talk about IBIS setup. This is my R3. This applies for the R5 as well. I'm going to talk about my 3-button autofocus, back button autofocus setup. I'm not going to go through the menus and stuff and show you how to set these up. That is available, all that information, in a couple other videos that I've done. And you can find links to those videos in the description for this video. But let me tell you about what I've been doing and what I found works really, really well. So on the lens itself, and I'm now shooting the RF 600 f4, but some of the images you're going to see were not taken with the RF 600 f4. They were taken with my old EF converted to the R3 or to the R5. But on this lens and on the EF 600 f4 IBIS settings, the stabilizer mode, and for those of you who don't know, the IBIS on the Canon cameras and the lenses are working in coordination with each other, so all of the control of IBIS is done by the switches on the lens. My stabilizer for most of my flight work now is set to mode 2, and I keep it there. Even for static subjects, mode 2 has been working really well for me for panning with birds, even birds that are doing some pretty erratic stuff. Snail kites can do some pretty erratic stuff. They can flip over They're going away from you one instant, looking for a snail, and then all of a sudden see a snail, flip over, and they're facing you, and that takes less than a second for them to do that. Go down and get a snail, come back up. That's pretty erratic movements. Mode 2 has been working fine for that. And I'm talking about even, I use Mode 2 even if I'm shooting high shutter speeds, up 1/4000th of a second, 1/5000th of a second. Using it for slower shutter speeds, 1/640th of a second. I'm getting shots that are sharp. Shooting bursts now. The technique here is shooting bursts of 15 frames per second or 30 frames per second on the R3. Of course, you don't have a choice on the R5. If you're shooting electronic shutter, which I am, you're shooting 20 frames per second. That gives you the probability of getting, you know, some sharp images amongst that burst of a flying bird, even at slow shutter speeds. But slow shutter speeds, high shutter speeds, Mode 2 is where I'm keeping my lens IBIS set now. And I'm not hand-holding so much in the strict sense anymore. I don't have it on right now, but I have a harness system that I've got a video for that, a couple of them actually on my YouTube channel here if you want to take a look at it, that allows me to use a monopod in this harness, which takes all the weight off your hands and arms. So when I'm talking about shooting these birds now, I'm almost always using my harness. So that's something I think you should know. I'm not strictly hand holding. I'm not on a tripod or a monopod in the normal sense, but I'm using a monopod with my harness. So that's the setup. Monopod in a harness to help stabilize things. Shooting on Mode 2 for the stabilizer on the lens. The back buttons. 3 back buttons set up for autofocus, which I love on the Canon R5 and the R3. I have my autofocus on button set to eye detect with tracking. I have my asterisk button set to zone. It's set to initiate whatever autofocus area that I have selected. I have it set to zone for these scenarios. And then I have the far right button set to spot. But the thing I want to talk about here in detail is the fact that I'm going and using a combination of eye detection and zone. And of course, eye detection, that's tracking, it's set to animals. And the zone I have set to non-tracking, no tracking with the zone, but animal detection is on. And what I'm finding, and I'm going to go over a couple scenarios here with images, showing that if the bird's in the clear, if it's got a distant background that's way out of focus compared to the subject, in this case the snail kite, the eye's there or the head's there or even the body's there, I'm using eye detection 90% of the time. I'm hitting the right autofocus on button, holding it down, getting lock on that bird, and it's doing really, really well, sticking with that bird all the way in, all the way, you know, to a perch if it's coming into a perch, all the way past if it's a flyby or something like that, no problems. Now the switch over, and that's what's nice, you just move your thumb over to the right one notch to the zone. I use zone if the bird's going to intersect something like a tree, branches of a bush, or something like that, that is going to, I think, is going to compete with the eye for the attention of the eye detect. I go to zone, and it works really, really well, staying on the bird through a lot of clutter that I think might or should take the attention of the autofocus system away from the bird. So if I'm shooting and the bird's in the clear, but I know it's coming into a perch and it may pass behind some branches, or even with some branches, I'm shooting eye detect until it's getting close, and as I sense it's getting close to the bushes, I switch over to zone and use zone the rest of the way in. And that has been working really, really well for me. The thing about the eye detect is it does look for an eye first, and then a head, and then a body. And if it's on the eye and all of a sudden the eye goes away, that can cause some problems for the autofocus. It'll grab the branches or something like that and go away from the bird. The thing with zone is that it's also looking for movement of wings, and stuff like that. So it seems to do, for me anyway, a better job of staying on the bird as it comes in, and there's going to be some competing elements in the frame. Now you're saying, well, why not just use zone all the time? Well, because the eye detect grabs the eye 90+% of the time, most of the time, when there's nothing there to compete with it, or it's big and bold in the frame, and I want the eye to be in focus, to be tack sharp as often as possible. Sometimes zone won't grab the eye as often. It'll grab the head or a wing or something like that, or the body, so the eye won't be quite as tack sharp. So I'm using a combination of eye detection and then going to the zone if I need to. Especially if the bird, snail kites now, they pick snails out of vegetation, grass, lily pads, things like that. When the bird's going down and gets into that grass, I'm going to zone because it just does a lot better sticking with the bird in zone, and it's a small zone frame now. We're not talking about the entire frame. I'm using a very small zone area. On the R3 you can change the size. I'm using a really pretty small one on the R3 that I've configured. On the R5, of course, the zone shapes and sizes are set for you. It's the smallest zone, the square in the center of the frame. And I'm using that when the bird's going down into the grass and coming back out. And once it's out, I'll switch back over to eye detect. So it can go the other way around too. It can be zone, then eye detect, or it can be eye detect, then zone, and then eye detect as the bird comes out, or whatever of the grass, whatever the scenario dictates is what I'm doing. But it's the flexibility of the back buttons being set up that way, and the little bit of a difference of behavior of eye detect with tracking versus a straight zone. Now, as far as tracking sensitivity and things like that, my camera, I have my case set to auto, but then I also have my switch trap subject menu item set to basically stay locked on to the subject, to set to 0. And I found that having these two settings is working really well for me. If anything else, if you want to go to the case 2 and set your tracking sensitivity all the way to the negative and acceleration deceleration all the way to the positive, and then on the next menu over you're going to find that you have the subject tracking menu item, which is switch track subjects. You can set that to 0 all the way over to locked on, and or stay with initial subject is what it is, what it says, initial subject. And so with those settings, I'm finding that it's working really, really well for me. I'm missing very few shots when it comes to the autofocus system on either the R3 or the R5. Does it get mixed up sometimes, grabbing the background? And I'm talking about, when I'm talking about background, it's really something on the same plane as the bird or directly behind it. It's not something that's really far away in the background. Those things never seem to be a problem with these autofocus systems. But blades of grass, vertical items right on the same focal plane or just behind can still fool these autofocus systems. Yep, they can, but the settings I've been using, I've been really, really happy with. The technique I'm now using, I'm really, really happy with, as far as getting the autofocus to grab the bird where I want it and hold on to it when I want it to hold on to it, which is always. So that's pretty much how I'm doing things. I'm going to talk a little bit more here, try to keep this video pretty short, though, about a little bit more about my technique now with eye detect with tracking especially. I did a video a long time ago when the R5 first came out about the autofocus system and the tracking on the Canon R5 being a paradigm shift and how it completely has changed how I do my bird and flight photography or my bird photography in general. And that hasn't changed. It has completely changed how I think about things when I'm shooting. And I want to touch on that again here, especially when it comes to talking about the eye detect with tracking. So when I get on a bird, and it's relatively big in the frame. I'm going to use that example, and it's really big in the frame. I mean, I'll shoot 840 millimeters with the 1.4 times teleconverter. I'll shoot 1200 millimeters with the 2 times teleconverter. Believe me, folks, on the RF 600 f4 especially, those 2 teleconverters, the image quality paired with the R3, with the R5, with this lens, unbelievably good. Best I've ever seen using teleconverters, and it used to be good. Now it's incredibly good. But anyway, that puts you, I'm always in the scenario where I want to, or a way of thinking that I want the bird relatively big in the frame sometimes, but I do want the whole bird a lot of times. I don't want to be clipping wings and stuff if I don't have to. But it can be a challenge at those high focal lengths to keep the bird, all the bird in the frame. And if when I get on the bird, I'm watching the autofocus to see where it's grabbed the bird, and I'm concentrating on the autofocus box rather than the bird, a lot of times that bird's moving around in the frame a lot more than I want it to, because remember that autofocus box now is not static in the center of the frame like it used to be when you shot, let's say, just a single center autofocus point, like I used to do with my 1DX2 or something like that. It's moving around. But anymore, I know, I'm almost positive that when I see that initial lock on, when I first get on the bird and I hit that back button, in this case the autofocus on button for me, to get eye detect with tracking going, and I see it grab that bird's head or eye, I don't even worry about it anymore. I don't even watch it to make sure it stays locked on. I am now concentrating on framing the bird in the frame, in the scene where I want it. If the bird's really big in the frame, I'm just concentrating on keeping the whole bird in the frame as it's moving around. Or if it's smaller in the frame and I'm looking for composition, overall composition of the frame, I'm putting the bird in the frame where I want it and concentrating on that as I pan. I'm not even paying attention to the autofocus anymore. I know it got the initial lock on, and it more than likely is not going to let go all the way through the burst or the opportunity that I have that I'm shooting. And that's how it's fundamentally changed how I do my photography now. I concentrate on putting the bird and keeping the bird in the frame where I want it, not making sure that the autofocus still is focused on the bird. And man, if you just start thinking that way when you first get on a bird and get initial lock on of the autofocus system, and then just start thinking about composing your image and doing the best job you can working with your bird while it's flying, then, I mean, it really does change how you work with bird in flight photography, even perch birds if there's movement going on, branches moving and stuff like that, or the bird is foraging on the ground. If you're shooting something like a reddish egret that keeps dancing around and stuff like that, before you had to make sure that you were staying on the bird autofocus wise. Now you don't have to worry about that. You get lock on, and now you can just focus on the bird itself, not the focusing, but you focus on the bird itself and where it is in the frame, and go with really paying attention to real-time composition of your bird images. A fundamental change to how I think about doing my photography now, and it's becoming second nature, probably has become second nature now to do that. So I thought I'd touch on that. Maybe some of you aren't looking at it that way. Maybe give that a try and see if changing how you think about what you're doing when you're looking through the viewfinder with a bird in flight or any other subject that you're shooting, and maybe you can improve not only your keeper rate as far as the shots that are sharp, but maybe get more full frame images that are composed exactly the way you want, reducing the amount of cropping that you have to do even for composition. So with that, I'm going to end this video, but I'm going to end it with a series of images. I put together a little video from this year's Snail Kite tours that I've done, and I hope you enjoy it. And I will be doing, of course, Snail Kite tours this next spring, a year from now, and it's never too early to book tours, as I'm booking tours for next year and even the year beyond that at this point right now. So if you're interested in doing some snail kite photography here in Florida, just contact me. The best way is by email, Leaving messages in the discussion of this video is not the best way to do it. Get a hold of me via email, and we can talk about doing some tours for Snail Kites. So, until next time, have great light, be safe out there. I hope you get a lot of great images, and I'll see you soon.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.